Hockey is a sport built on toughness, on sacrifice, on the idea that the game demands more from you than any other sport in the world and that the best players give it willingly. But behind that identity, there is a darker truth that the sport has spent decades struggling to face. Today, we're telling 3 stories that the hockey world must never forget. Not because they're comfortable to hear, but because the people in them deserve better. And because forgetting them makes it easier to repeat the mistakes that cost them everything. These are not stories about losing a championship. They are not stories about bad trades or coaching failures. These are the stories of real human beings, young men with families, with futures, with dreams that extended far beyond hockey, whose lives were changed or taken by the sport they loved and the systems that surrounded it. 3 stories, 3 eras, 3 reminders of what hockey has cost and what it still owes. Bill Masterton. We start in 1968, and we start with a dream deferred and then denied. Bill Masterton was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, on August 13, 1938. He was the kind of player who made everyone around him better. A skilled, intelligent center who earned a master's degree in finance at the University of Denver, while simultaneously leading the Denver Pioneers to the NCAA championship in 1961, winning the tournament MVP award. After college, he signed with the Montreal Canadiens organization. But the Canadiens had too much depth at the center position to give him a real shot. And by 1964, Masterton had made a painful decision. He stepped away from his professional hockey dream, took a job as an engineer at Honeywell in Minneapolis, and played amateur hockey instead. That might have been the end of his story, but in 1967, the NHL expanded from 6 teams to 12. One of the new franchises was the Minnesota North Stars. Their coach and general manager, Ren Blair, had scouted Masterton during his time with the United States national team and purchased his playing rights from Montreal. Masterton signed a 2-year contract. He became the first player to sign with the North Stars. At 29 years old, after years of waiting, the dream he had set aside was alive again. His wife Carol remembered it simply. He always wanted a shot at the NHL, and expansion was a wonderful thing for him. It was a dream come true. On October 11, 1967, in the North Stars' inaugural game against St. Louis, Masterton scored the first goal in franchise history. By mid-season, he had 4 goals and 12 points. He was proving he belonged. And then January 13, 1968, 4 minutes into a home game against the Oakland Seals at the Met Center, Masterton carried the puck into the Seals' zone. He passed the puck off to a teammate, and as he did, 2 Oakland players, Larry Cahan and Ron Harris, converged on him. The collision knocked Masterton backward. He fell headfirst onto the ice. He was not wearing a helmet. Almost no NHL player was in 1968. The force of the back of his head hitting the ice was catastrophic. Blood poured from his mouth and his nose. Before he lost consciousness, a teammate kneeling over him heard him murmur 2 words: "Never again, never again." He never regained consciousness. 2 days later, on January 15, 1968, Bill Masterton was taken off life support. He died at 29 years old, the only player in NHL history to die as a direct result of an injury suffered on the ice. The player who checked him, Ron Harris, carried that moment for the rest of his life. "It bothers you the rest of your life," Harris said. "It wasn't dirty, and it wasn't meant to happen that way. Still, it's very hard, because I made the play. It's always in the back of my mind." The debate over mandatory helmets in the NHL raged for 11 more years after Masterton died. 11 years. And it was not until the 1979-80 season that the league finally required all new players to wear them. The players who were already in the league were grandfathered in, allowed to keep playing without a helmet if they chose. The last helmetless player in the NHL was Craig McTavish, who retired in 1997, 29 years after Bill Masterton died for the want of one. Today, the Bill Masterton Memorial Trophy is awarded annually to the NHL player who best exemplifies perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to hockey. His jersey number 19 was retired by the North Stars, and when the franchise relocated to Dallas, they honored it there too. Never worn again. Bill Masterton was a dreamer who finally got his shot and gave everything for it. He deserved so much more time. The Swift Current Broncos, December 30, 1986. Swift Current, Saskatchewan. The Swift Current Broncos were a Western Hockey League team in their first season back in the league after a 12-year absence from Swift Current. They were the youngest roster in the WHL. They They had a struggling 14-36 record, and on that cold Tuesday afternoon, they were boarding a team bus, a mid-1960s Western Flyer D600 Canuck, to make the roughly 2.5-hour drive to Regina for a game against the Pats. Defenseman Bob Wilkie remembered later that there had been some uncertainty about whether to travel that day because of the weather, but the conditions didn't look much different from dozens of other road trips. They got on the bus. At approximately 3:45 inches the afternoon, the bus entered Saskatchewan Highway 1, the Trans-Canada Highway, traveling at around 53 kilometers per hour, just 4 kilometers east of Swift Current. The road curved to the right over a Canadian Pacific Rail overpass. There was black ice on the curve. The driver had no warning and no time. The bus skidded. It went off the overpass. It rolled onto its side and crashed into a ditch below. Wilkie, who had been toward the back of the bus, described the horror of what followed. The chaos of not knowing who was okay. Players screaming. The desperate search for survivors. 4 players had been seated at the very rear of the bus. They were the 4 who didn't survive. Trent Kress was 20 years old. He had a fiancée. In the team photo taken that fall, he looked like a man with something on his mind. The kind of face that seems already in the future, already thinking about the next thing. Scott Kruger was 19. The mischievous one. The one with the open-mouthed smile that made it look like he was about to say something funny. Chris Mantica was 19. Big, strong, thick-necked, already wearing the trace of a mustache. The tough guy. The protector. And Brent Ruff. He was 16 years old. The youngest player on the team. In every photograph from that fall, he was the one smiling so hard that his eyes were squinting shut. He was also the younger brother of Lindy Ruff, then the captain of the Buffalo Sabres, who learned what had happened to his little brother by phone that evening. The 4 players' jersey numbers were retired by the Swift Current Broncos immediately. Kress's number 8, Kruger's number 9, Ruff's number 11, Mantica's number 22. The Broncos still wear a commemorative patch in their honor to this day. But here is the part of this story that doesn't get talked about enough. The players who survived. And what happened to them after. The team was made up of teenagers, kids, who watched 4 of their teammates die in front of them on a highway in Saskatchewan. And then, in a culture that had no framework for what those players had just experienced, no mental health support, no counseling, no acknowledgement that what they had seen would fundamentally change who they were expected to get back on the ice. And they did. Because hockey culture in 1986 did not make room for grief. It made room for toughness, for playing through it, for getting back on the bus. The Broncos played out the rest of that season, led by a 19-year-old center named Joe Sakic, who would go on to become one of the greatest players in the history of the game, and a young winger named Sheldon Kennedy, whose name would later become attached to one of hockey's other darkest stories. They kept going. 2 years later, in 1989, the Swift Current Broncos won the Memorial Cup. Bob Wilkie, who now runs mental wellness programs for young athletes, put it plainly, it affected us all in so many different ways that it ruined relationships. It blurred futures. At that time, there was just a lot of ignorance around these sorts of things. Lauren Frey, an assistant coach on that team, still thinks about those 4 boys all the time. You think about the kids and what could have been and what happened to them, he said. It's frustrating from that standpoint, but it's something you'll never forget. On December 30, 2016, 30 years to the day, a granite memorial in the shape of a 4-leaf clover was unveiled at the crash site off Highway 1 near Swift Current, 1 player represented in each leaf. The WHL awards the 4 Broncos Memorial Trophy each season to its Player of the Year named in their honor, forever connecting the league's highest individual achievement to the 4 young men who never got to have one of their own. Derek Boogaard. Now, we come to the most recent of these stories, and in some ways, the most complicated, because the death of Derek Boogaard wasn't a sudden accident. It was the slow, grinding result of a system that asked a human being to do things no human being should have to do, and then looked away when that system started destroying him. Derek Boogaard was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan in 1982, in the same province where the Swift Current Broncos bus would crash 4 years later. He grew up in an RCMP family, moving across Western Canada as his father was posted to different communities. Boogaard was, by every account, a gentle person, a quiet, soft-spoken man who organized charity events for children, who was described by his Rangers teammates as a teddy bear, a loving friend, and a big heart. His former roommate, Brent Burns, called him one of the kindest people he had ever known. On the ice, Boogaard was something else entirely. He stood 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 265 pounds. He was one of the largest players in NHL history, and his entire professional value was built on one thing: fighting. His job description, as an NHL enforcer, was brutally simple. Hurt people before they hurt your teammates. Keep order, keep your stars safe, and do it by putting your body and your brain on the line every night. He played 6 seasons in the NHL for the Minnesota Wild and then the New York Rangers, and was involved in 66 documented fights. 66 fights, each one a blow to the head. Each one a piece of damage accumulating in tissue and neurons that science would only later be able to map and name. The injuries were constant. His hands were broken, his shoulders were wrecked, and his head took punishment that no medical staff at the time was fully equipped to assess or treat. When he was hurt, he couldn't say he was hurt, not really. Enforcers who admitted to concussions risked being seen as soft, risked losing their job to someone tougher who was willing to get back up. So Boogaard played through it. And when the pain became unbearable, he was given prescription opioids to manage it. He went to rehabilitation twice. Twice he tried to get free from the addiction that the painkillers had created. It wasn't enough. On May 13, 2011, while the NHL playoffs were underway, Derek Boogaard was found dead in his Minneapolis apartment. He was 28 years old. The medical examiner ruled his death an accidental overdose, a combination of oxycodone and alcohol. His family donated his brain to research. When scientists at Boston University's CTE Center examined what was inside, they found chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the degenerative brain disease caused by repeated blows to the head. Boogaard was the youngest hockey player ever diagnosed with CTE at that time. His brother Aaron Boogaard said something in the aftermath that should have changed hockey forever. We asked Derek to do a job that no human being should have to do, but the story didn't end with Derek. In the 111 days following his death, 2 more NHL enforcers died. Rick Ripien, 27 years old, was found dead at his home. Wade Belak, 35 years old, took his own life. 3 enforcers, 111 days. None of them older than 35. The summer of 2011 forced a reckoning that the NHL had been avoiding for decades. Every honest observer of the game knew what the enforcer role was costing the men who filled it. Depression, addiction, brain damage, isolation, anxiety about keeping a job that required you to hurt and be hurt on command. The league's response was measured. Gradual rule changes tightened fighting. The game's analytics revolution eventually diminished the role of the enforcer simply by proving it had little impact on winning. But no formal acknowledgement, no institutional accountability. Boogaard's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the NHL, alleging the league bore responsibility for the brain damage and addiction that killed their son. The case was settled. The terms were confidential. 3 stories, 3 eras, 3 losses. Bill Masterton, who waited years for his chance, finally got it and died because a sport wouldn't mandate a helmet. He was 29 years old. Brent Kress, Scott Kruger, Chris Mantica. Brent Ruff, 4 teenagers sitting at the back of a team bus on a winter afternoon in Saskatchewan who never made it to Regina. The oldest was 20. The youngest was 16. Derek Boogaard, a gentle giant who was asked, night after night, to do things that destroyed him from the inside, in a system that gave him pills when it should have given him answers. He was 28 years old. Hockey is a sport that demands so much from the people who play it. Speed, skill, sacrifice, toughness. But toughness has a shadow side, a culture that sometimes mistakes suffering and silence for strength, that moves on too quickly from its losses, that finds it easier to retire a jersey than to ask the hard questions about why the jersey needed retiring. These 3 stories are hockey's hard questions, and the least the sport can do, the least any of us can do, is refuse to let them be forgotten.